Switching over. Good morning. Hardcore Penn State football recording on Sunday morning. Hopefully you had a good weekend. Penn State demolishes, rails Purdue 49-10. We're going to get right into it. We got some fan questions, some rapid reactions, as we also look ahead to the college football playoff landscape. If you haven't already, please make sure to like the video if you're watching live on YouTube. And if you're listening on podcasts, potentially on Monday morning, make sure you're subscribed. Let's get right into it. Welcome into Hardcore Penn State Football. I'm Cory Lestochi. With me, as always, the great Shawn Kane. How are you doing today, Shawn? A little 11 a.m. start for you. We're almost as bad as Fox.
I am easy like Sunday morning, Cory, especially after a 39-point win. Pretty easy waking up and talking about Penn State football right before, and we will be taking you almost right to the NFL games. So stick with us, and we'll get you to. I know the Steelers have a big one at 1:00. The Dolphins have a small one at 1:00. So yeah. How are you today?
Pretty good. Besides, I don't know what the F YouTube's doing. YouTube just messed up big time. But otherwise, I'm doing pretty good. Don't exactly know what's going on there. Sorry about that. I'm trying to fix
That's
whatever the hell. YouTube is, ooh, we might be struggling altogether. All right.
struggle bus population, us.
Yeah. All right. I think we're live on X and on YouTube, but it's being weird. But I think we are live. Shawn, who do the Dolphins play today?
Play the Raiders.
Okay. When's that at?
That is at 1:00.
Fantastic. Penn State gets the win, 49-10. I think we covered in pregame as much as we needed to cover this game. I was like, did we cover Purdue enough? And like the short answer is yes, because the game was not close at all. Penn State jumps out to a 14-0 lead almost instantaneously, and they never looked back. That's 2 weeks in a row now, Shawn. Penn State has started incredibly fast. They scored 42 points in the last two first quarters.
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Yeah, we're up 10-0 on Ohio State.
That's true. I would argue that the offense could start a little bit faster, not kick that field goal, but yeah, you're right. So 52
as
points.
As a team, yeah. Yeah, as a team, I mean, I would say that they started fast, 3 straight weeks. But yeah, that was one of the issues at the beginning of the year that seems to be getting remedied now. I definitely think the competition we're playing probably has a little bit to do with it, although I don't think Washington's a bad team. They're not quite, they're definitely not on the level of Penn State, and that was a team that, looking back at it, should have, in a whiteout environment, should have beat them pretty good, and we did. And then Purdue, I mean, we talked pretty ad nauseum about how they're the, in my mind, the worst team in the Big Ten. And they played like the worst team in the Big Ten, and Penn State took it to them. So, and it was really from the opening kickoff right to the end. I would argue it was a pretty complete game, because I know that was something that people were looking for, was the quote unquote complete game, which I think is more rare than people realize.
Yeah.
In college football. Yeah. Yeah. Like the complete, like you hear that all the time too. I want to see a complete game out of this team, or complete 4 quarters. It doesn't happen all that often. for that many teams. Like, yeah, LSU 2019 probably had a lot of complete games, but if you're not like on that tippy top level, they're more rare. But I would argue this one was a complete game. Now, worst team in the conference, I get all that, but I didn't really think they had a complete game against Kent State. They're the worst team in the FBS.
Yeah. That was exactly my point early on was I don't care who the opponent is, you still have to go have a complete game.
Yep.
And they're able to do that. So Drew Aller started crazy hot. I think he completed his first like 10 for 10-ish passes. Ended up with only 2 incompletions on the day. One was a drop by Katron Allen, one was a throwaway. 17 of 19 for 247 yards, 3 touchdowns. That completion percentage of 89% is the best completion percentage for a starting quarterback at Penn State in over 25 years. So not too shabby, Shawn.
No, not at all. I thought this was your typical Drew Aller game, just really efficient, getting the ball to the open guy. Something that I actually tweeted about, of course, I tweeted a criticism of it on a game that he was super, super efficient. The receivers really, outside of Trey Wallace having the touchdown catch, throughout the game, they didn't really do very much. And I get that's Harrison Wallace had 2 catches and Omari Evans had 1 catch. So a total of 3 catches for the receivers. And I understand the limitations that we have at receiver. But I do think sometimes, Drew, especially against a team like Purdue, try to force the ball in there a little bit more. Try to throw a guy open.
We have a fan question about that exact thing later. Funny enough.
Yeah, I guess we're thinking on the same page. So maybe I'll get a little more into that answer later. But yeah, I think he's playing well, but there are still things that I want to see from him that I think he's better with this year. But in conference play, I definitely want to see more because he's going to have to do that more as the season goes on.
Yeah,
and
Purdue,
as postseason approaches.
Yeah, we talked about Purdue and how their passing defense is one of the worst in the country. Didn't have to force the ball, but against better competition, presumably in the playoff, he's going to have to do that kind of like he did against USC. Welcome in Mighty Jew on YouTube. Hope you're having a good Sunday morning. The receivers, I think, is something that I guess we can start with the negative. We'll talk about Tyler Warren in a second. But the receivers didn't show up yet again today. If you take out Trey Wallace's 46-yard catch, which, to be fair, the reason why he was wide open wasn't just because it was completely blown coverage. It was because the safety was so worried about Tyler Warren, which is pretty cool that he's attracting that attention, that even a safety who has the deepest man literally still focuses on Tyler Warren and lets Trey Wallace go. Like it's a little bit different than a blown coverage, like just because 2 defenders got confused. But even so, if you take that long reception out for Trey Wallace, which was 46 yards, he ends up with 1 catch for 8 yards. And then Omari Evans had 1 catch for 2 yards. And I just told you all of the catches that the wide receivers had on Saturday. So Tyler Warren, 8 catches, 127. Luke Reynolds, 3 catches for 53. Katron Allen, 4 catches for 44. Nick Singleton, 2 catches for 20. Khalil Dinkins, 2 catches for 5. So 3 different tight ends and 2 running backs still gets you 7 different people catching the football. But really only 1 significant catch by a wide receiver. And oh, by the way, the Anthony Ivy drop on a laser by Bo Prabula. And also Taysir Denmark getting hit in the head with the football. Not ideal from the standpoint of breeding confidence in the next class of receivers that are going to need to start taking more responsibility starting next year.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So not really, and I think a lot of people are almost looking to Taysir Denmark as some savior come playoff time. I mean,
it's not going to happen that way.
Yeah, and look, I pretty excited about Tyser Denmark's future. I think when he plays, they do try to make it an emphasis for him to get the ball. So I think he is showing some things in practice. But when the ball hits you right in the dome, you have to be able to catch the ball. And Anthony Ivy, I mean, the ball was perfect to him, and he's not able to reel it in. So yeah, receiver, they got to go to the portal again next year.
Yeah,
they have to. And not to get somebody, no disrespect to Julian Fleming, but not to get somebody at Julian Fleming's level, somebody higher. Because, well, Harrison Wallace can come back next year, right?
I believe so. I'll double check, but yeah,
Yeah.
if he wants to, I think
Yeah.
he still has one more.
And I mean, I think he'll be back. I can't see him being a that high of a draft pick. But even if he is back, they still gotta go get somebody. And I realize receivers
Redshirt junior, just to confirm.
Redshirt junior. Okay, cool. So we have him back next year, assuming he comes back. And I understand receivers are pricey in the portal. That is true. But they're gonna need somebody because they're not gonna have Tyler Warren just to put the whole passing game on next year, like we do this year. And I like the tight ends that we have, but Tyler Warren is having the best year a tight end has ever had at Penn State.
Right.
And I just don't think it's realistic to expect that to be replicated by any of the young, albeit talented, tight ends next year. So they're gonna have to go in the portal to find a guy or two, and hope that a guy like Tyser Denmark, Anthony Ivy, one of these young guys develops.
Yeah, and that's where I get hung up on it, Shawn, is like you can go in the portal and 100% get one guy, maybe even two guys. But there's you're not going to get a number one guy, a known number one guy in the portal. You're just not. Like whoever you go get, there's going to be some sort of gamble. Like there may be one, maybe two wide receivers every year, and not even every year, that are like surefire 100% going to be your number one wide receiver. Like there's just not very many of them. Everyone else you're kind of taking a guess on, and hopefully it works out. And I agree with you, like maybe you take two to increase those chances, but you just can't. They took two the year prior and neither of them worked out, right? So there's just not very many of them. And to your point, if there's only one or two of them, and we've had this conversation several times, what are the chances that Penn State is able to win that bidding war? And that to me is like, realistically, how much better can you get in the portal besides a Julian Fleming? Realistically,
I think it's realistic. You look at a team like Colorado; they built their whole receiving core through the portal, so it could happen.
Yeah, and they got one of the over Penn State.
Yes. So it could happen, and I'm not even talking about Travis Hunter. I'm talking about Jimmy Horn Jr. I'm talking about LeJohntay Webster.
You think Jimmy Horn Jr. is 100% better than Trey Wallace?
Yeah.
See, I don't know about that.
I think he get open better than Trey Wallace can. Trey Wallace disappears
against Big 12 defenses, sure. Also, you have other wide receivers.
He played Purdue yesterday. He got open. He got two catches. One of them was a touchdown, but like you said, a lot of that's due to Warren.
The having other wide receivers also helps with that, and they also run an offense where they're getting way more opportunities.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's close. I'm just saying you go get Jimmy Horn Jr. was on the same level as a Dante Cephas coming out of the portal, as far as
that's fair
expectations. And I thought I was to give Jimmy Horn Jr. I think Jimmy Horn Jr. really is more like an Omari Evans build. You just don't know, right? I guess my point is, I'm not saying they can't be good. But what I'm saying is you're never going to really know for sure that they're going to be good. Like we thought Dante Cephas was going to be good. Wasn't the case. I think thought Malik McLean was more of a project. But we didn't. after that West Virginia game, like, oh, maybe he's going to be able to do some more things for us, and that didn't happen. So I guess my concern is, like, yes, I agree with you. We need to go into portal and get 1 to 2 guys next year. I just don't know. I'm thinking like the Colemans of the world, right? Is who Penn State needs to go get. Not even a Jimmy Horn Jr. Because if you go take a Jimmy Horn Jr., the chances that it's a Jimmy Horn Jr. or a Dante Cephas is probably 50-50 on whoever that player is. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get at is trying to fix this via the transfer portal is not going to work long term.
Well,
it hasn't even worked short term. And I'm not saying you're saying that, but I guess my point is, like, we've got to expect more from the Johnsons, the Ivies, the Denmarks, the Saunders of the world. We've got to figure that out. That to me is, I don't know what you do there, but that to me is the true systemic issue. It's not ponying up in the portal. It's why aren't the guys we're recruiting not necessarily being Jahan Dotsons, but why can't they be Parker Washingtons? Why can't we even have them being, I don't know, what's another good example of a good but not great Penn State wide receiver?
Yeah.
Say
I was gonna say a lot of people would consider this blasphemy, but I never considered Deshaun Hamilton a great receiver.
Yeah, I mean,
I thought he was good. He was really good,
clutch.
but I didn't think he was great. I didn't think he was Jahan Dotson.
No.
And there's nobody close to Deshaun Hamilton on this team.
Right, but exactly, and you need somebody like that, especially in the slot. And Liam Clifford and Kane Saunders haven't been that at all.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, yes. The healthy way, and I think the correct way to build a receiving room is through recruiting. I think that's the way you build every position, primarily. Now, at some point, though, Cory, does this come back to Marquise Hagans?
Yeah, I mean, that's natural.
We might have to start having a conversation about Marquise Hagans, because we both gave him a pass last year. But it's on you to start developing these guys. And I think the passing game, while it's better, it's being covered up by having our 6'6" All-American and Drew Aller.
Absolutely. They're not. So we always made the point last couple of years that Drew Aller needs to elevate the rest of the team, and that's true. But at the same time, the receivers should still be trying to elevate their quarterback as well, and that has not happened at all. You're exactly right. And I agree with you about Marcus Hagans. My concern is I feel like we're in some sort of receiver purgatory here. Like, how it was like the offensive line a couple of years ago. How many times do you go get a new coach until you just, what do? I mean, how long do you wait is the question, especially when you don't want to continue to have turnover. Do you give him this next class? Because again, he hasn't had really that much time to go get his guys. There's just some good receivers in this 2025 class.
Mm-hmm. I think it's probably going to save his job.
Is that what it is, Shawn? Do you give him? But this is kind of crazy to me, potentially, and I think some fans would not want to do this. Do you give him 2 more years? Yeah, can you afford to give him 2 more years?
If they're not better by next year, I think they should fire him next year.
But those guys that he goes and recruits, theoretically, like even look at next year, right? So you get Trey Wallace back. Do you expect a lot of Denmark? Do you expect a lot out of the true freshmen? Like, if those are his guys, how long are you willing to wait for him to develop his guys? I guess that's my question. And I feel like if you fire him after the end of next year, he brought in that whole class, the 2025 class, and hasn't really had a chance to groom them. The other question is, what would that have been? What year, what class was it? 2022 class? The class where they brought in like 5 receivers? Is that one? The Ivy class? No, that was the 2020. Yeah, it was.
That was the year before.
Oh, 2021? Okay. The Amari Evans, the Ivy, the Johnson class.
Oh, no, you're right. 23 was Carmelo Taylor, and that was it. Yeah, you're right.
So is it Hagan's responsibility to somehow develop those guys, even though they weren't his guys? I don't know. That's where I get confused.
Yeah,
why I don't, not confused, but I just feel helpless.
I think so. I mean, it's not like those guys were all bums coming out of high school.
Yeah.
Like Caden Saunders is a top 100 player um, in the country, and now part of his issue has been injuries. To be fair to him, but
Right.
when he plays, I mean, does anybody really get the warm and fuzzies from Caden Saunders? I never have. Maybe next year I will,
No,
but
I
like
haven't.
last year, I thought he was a jag, just a
Not even
guy.
as a punt returner. I mean, you could
No,
make the
I mean,
argument what Denmark did as a punt returner yesterday and what Zion Tracy's done in a couple games has been better than anything Caden Saunders did as a punt returner.
right. And then and look, you're going to have some guys that just don't work out. I mean, Ohio State, Bama, they have guys that receiver, even though they have great
That's a
receivers every
really
year that
good
don't
point,
work out.
Shawn. And people don't
But you got to
realize
have
that.
guys that do.
Yeah. So people I think always nitpick at Penn State's like 5-star receivers that don't work out.
Yep.
And they look at Alabama and Ohio State and like take Emeka Ibuka for a second at Ohio State. Pretty good player. But you could make the argument, I'm pretty sure he was a 5-star guy. If not, he was
He
a
was.
very, very high. Okay. Um, he's been good for Ohio State, but he hasn't been, Jeremiah Smith, Marvin Harris, Maserati Marv good. You know what
He's
I
been
mean?
closer to Parker Washington, yes.
Yes. And so to me, if I'm a Penn State fan and I have a 5-star guy named Emeka Buka and he ends up being Parker Washington, technically I would probably say that was a disappointing. He's a good player. He wasn't a Marvin Harrison. I think Penn State fans have this idea that if Penn State gets a 5-star guy, they expect them to all be Marvin Harrisons. They all expect them to be Ryan Williams. They expect them all to be great. And even Ohio State and Bama, what you just said, will have 5-stars that absolutely are freaks, and then they'll have 5-stars that are just good. And Penn State's case, maybe they've had a couple that were even worse than that. But I guess my point is, it's not whether it's the portal or the recruiting, it's not about just getting one really good guy. It's about elevating your chances to you get 3 or 4 really good guys, and you hope 2 of them pan out. I think that's what you're hoping for.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to development for sure. I would also point out, and I know a big reason why Taylor Summerfield is no longer here is he didn't recruit that great. I mean, and there were years like the Carmelo Taylor year. You can't really have that. You can't have a year where you only bring one guy in. But you also have to be able to develop, because there are teams, Cory, that recruit a whole lot worse than Penn State at receiver, including when Stubblefield was here. And they go against a team like Purdue, and a lot of guys are eating at receiver.
Yeah.
Why not here?
Yeah.
That's the thing I can't get past.
The thing that's interesting to me is this team does better against man coverage than they do against zone passing the football, which is very interesting to me. Now, take out the Ohio States for a second, because I'm not talking about elite man coverage, but against like the Marylands, the Purdues, the Minnesotas, the Illinois of the world, they do much better against man coverage teams than they do against zone, which makes sense to a certain degree, that you keep everything in front of you kind of mindset. But they don't even get completions in zone. Like, they don't even sit in zones very well. Like, they don't find the weak spot in the zone. Like, Liam Clifford to me is a guy that needs to find a way to get open in zones all the time, and he hasn't been able to do that.
Yep.
But no, I agree with you, Shawn. It is frustrating in that sense, and it doesn't help when Anthony Ivy goes out there and drops a pass, and you're kind of like, oh, well, that doesn't make me feel good about the future. And Denmark, although he had limited play time, he had the reverse and wasn't able to do anything with it. It was a cute play to try to get him involved. They try to get Amari Evans involved again, and he wasn't able to make the guy miss. So it wasn't a perfect throw. But that's KJ Hamler. He makes that guy miss. And so they're trying to get these guys some opportunities, and it's not clearly working out there. And then Denmark obviously has the ball hit off his head too. So I tweeted during the game, it's really nice to see Andy Kotelnicki get all of the different ways to get Tyler Warren involved. I'd like to see him do that with more of the receivers, and he did. Like he found different ways to try to get them the football, and they have not capitalized on those opportunities to this point. And I feel like we started really negative on the show talking about wide receivers, but it is, I think, if Penn State gets to the playoff and plays against a relatively good defense, and they're having to throw the ball to win, I think you can look at this Purdue game and kind of say proof was in the pudding when they played Purdue, that they weren't able to get the receivers more involved. Now, again, they are really targeting Tyler Warren, which is maybe a good transition, but the receivers are not going to have as many opportunities. There's no doubt about that. But against the Ohio States of the world, against teams that have a safety that can lock down Tyler Warren, how is Penn State going to move the football?
Well, and I think you kind of hit on a bit of a silver lining in all this, because I think the team in the country that matches up best with Tyler Warren is Ohio State. I don't think another team really has as good of an answer as they do. And Tyler Warren still did damage against them. And I think he could have.
Yeah,
he could have done more damage against them too.
They have, Lathan Ransom and Downs.
Yeah.
Like you could probably argue top 5 safeties in the country.
Yeah. And they're both on the same defense. And all these other playoff contenders, I don't think any of them have as good of an answer for Tyler Warren as Ohio State. We already went through that. And like we said, I mean, Tyler Warren, he didn't have as productive a day as he's had. But I don't think anybody could really stop the Warren cat formation. At least nobody's come up with anything to stop that. And that's been our best formation this season. Because I just don't think anybody. I heard one of the linemen after the game say, I think it was Drew Shelton, when Tyler Warren lines up in the backfield, you hear the whole defense just start panicking, and there's a general sense of panic on the other side. General rule for football, as a guy who's never coached, do that a lot. Make the defense worried and make them have to talk to each other all the way up until the ball is snapped, because I think that's generally true for every defense we're going to play going forward, including when we're in, hopefully, knock on wood, make the playoff.
Yeah, I agree. He ends up with 8 catches for 127 yards and 1 touchdown. And then he also added 3 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. A lot of that coming on the 48-yard run where he just ran away from everybody. I think that kind of maybe separates him too from other tight ends in Penn State history. Like even going back to like Mike Gesicki, like Tyler Warren has run away from the cop speed. Like he has the ability to, when he broke that run, when the corner finally caught up to him and he outran the corner the last 20 yards, like I don't think people realize he's that quick. I always kind of go back to that realization for me was the Ole Miss game when he broke that play and just kept running. Like he is by far the best tight end as far as yards after catch. Like does he have as good of hands as Pat Freiermuth? Probably not. Does he, maybe have exactly the same jumping ability as Mike Gesicki? Maybe not. But I don't think anyone comes relatively close to his ability after the catch. Well, obviously, because he literally just gets the football and runs. But and I don't exactly know why. Like he's quick, he has good top end speed, and he's very physical. But he's not like it's not like he does anything of those things amazingly well. He's just a weird combination of all of that, and he's just kind of like a bull in a china shop. And people literally can't. I'm wondering now, Shawn, if it's to the point where like it's almost in defenses' heads, like they don't want to tackle this guy. It's like trying to tackle an anvil.
Yeah, he's tough. He's definitely tough to bring down. Yeah, I think his speed is something that's almost kind of underrated in this game, because I mean, if you look at him, he doesn't look that fast. Like Brock Bowers looks faster, if that makes sense, in my mind. But when Warren gets the ball, yeah, I mean, he's not only moving fast, but he's strong, and guys like you said, guys don't want to tackle him. And as far as his hands go, I would say there's not a whole lot of separation between him and Freiermuth with that.
You don't think
Gesicki,
so?
yeah, I don't think so. Look at that play that he made against Ohio State down the sidelines.
Yeah,
Like that's elite
true.
stuff. And then even the Purdue game, in the end zone, his touchdown catch, like going up and getting it. I agree with you on the Gesicki thing. Gesicki is just a freak of an athlete when it comes to going up
Right.
and getting the ball because, you know, I think if we had a podcast back then, the whole Warren was a quarterback thing, it would be Gesicki was a volleyball player thing.
Yeah.
Because you really saw that with him. But yeah, I mean, he just does so many things at an extremely high level, and there's not a hole in his game.
So let me
Like,
ask you, Shawn. Should he be considered for the Heisman?
I think so.
Wait. Start that over.
All right. Yeah, I think he should be considered. I mean, I think a lot of times people consider the Heisman to be a quarterback only award, and I think that's a mistake. You're looking for the best player in college football. And I don't think there are too many guys that have an argument for that. But one of those guys who clearly has that argument is Tyler Warren. He is carrying this passing offense right now. And not only that, he could beat you catching the ball, he could beat you running the ball. Hell, he could even beat you throwing the ball. So when you consider everything that he brings to this offense, I don't know how you can't consider him to be at least a Heisman candidate.
I think to me, this is a year where there is a bunch of quarterbacks that are just running away from it and are just obviously going to be in contention. I thought Dylan Gabriel, in my opinion, should have been number one right now, just because he has a number one team in the country and he's continued to find ways to win when they really needed him to. But then he had that kind of a bad game against Wisconsin, and you're just like, who do you give it to? Like Cam Ward, maybe, but like, and the other one is Travis Hunter, and like, here's my thought on Travis Hunter. People are flipping out over his game against Utah, which, by the way, Utah was playing like their 19th quarterback of the season. And Travis Hunter gets an interception off a tip pass and then scores a touchdown in garbage time. And people are saying it was like his Heisman game. I don't think Travis Hunter is that good in coverage, first of all. And I think he's a pretty good wide receiver. I don't think he's like on the same level as like Devontae Smith, though, the last receiver to win the Heisman. And it kind of turns into a Jabril Peppers conversation of, do you just get a lot of credit for kind of doing random things pretty well and never really doing anything great? And that's how I feel with Travis Hunter. Everyone's like, oh, he's always on the field. Well, the Heisman's not a cardio award. You don't win the Heisman just because you play a lot of football. If you want to win the cardio award, you go run cross country. Like, this is an award for the best player. And just because you play on both sides of the field, I don't think necessarily means you're the best player. I think he's really good, and I think he should be in contention for it. But I'm not overly convinced that Travis Hunter should win the Heisman. And you start looking around, and I would be very hesitant to put Tyler Warren in that category. But then you start thinking, like, why not? As far as like MVP valuable player to Penn State, I don't know what Penn State's record is if they don't have Tyler Warren. I don't know how much they're able to move the football if they don't have Tyler Warren. The running game has been, nixed at times. We just talked about the wide receivers for the first 20 minutes. That's a question mark. They very easily, could have. Well, I think we'd agree they would have lost at USC. They would have lost, obviously, to Ohio State, potentially lost to Wisconsin, and who knows, going into Minnesota too. So I think they'd be okay at West Virginia and Illinois, but maybe not. I mean, he's just that good, and so when you start putting him as far as how valuable he is, you could make the argument he's already more valuable than Travis Hunter. You could argue Shadir Sanders is more valuable to Colorado than Travis Hunter is. And nobody's more valuable to Penn State than Tyler Warren. So I think he should be in that contention. I think it'd be really cool for him to receive an invitation, but I'm also not going to be naive about it. There's very little chance he wins the Heisman.
Well, another name that I like and I may vote for if I had a vote, but I don't. I don't know how you get a vote for a Heisman because a lot of random people vote for the Heisman Trophy.
Right.
But anyway, what about Ashton Jenney or
Yeah.
out of Boise? I mean, that guy is almost at 2,000 yards already. And I know people will say, well, he plays at Boise State. True. But he also played against Oregon and had 25 carries for 192 yards. Like I think that guy is really getting looked over. Because I agree with you. I think the only quarterback really worthy of it this year is Cam Ward. And the reason I would say him is Miami's whole team is built around Cam Ward.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I don't think they're very good, Miami,
No.
at much anything. But Cam Ward is just so good that he just covers everything up. And if he has a game like the Georgia Tech game that they lost, where he's not playing at an elite level, he was still good. He gave them a chance to win. But if has a couple turnovers, they lose. Like, that's just what happens. So to me, he's the only quarterback that's really worthy of it. Dylan Gabriel, he has too many like miss moments for me.
Yeah.
Like too many moments that you're like, this guy that good. I think he has been really good this year, not taking anything away from him, but he has too many like, this guy's okay.
I agree.
And then the other guy who I think will win it is Travis Hunter. And I think he will win it because he is doing it on both sides of the ball. And I hear what you're saying. I think he's a little overstated on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
But he's able to be a good to really good player on both sides of the ball. And that is a rare thing. And I think with the whole Deion Sanders hype train,
I was gonna say that PR they're doing a hell of a job in marketing for him.
And they have been pushing him. They've been pushing him to win the Heisman for like 4 years now, even going back to when he was at Georgia Southern. So I think you combine all that, he'll probably win it. Should he? I don't know. I also just hate Colorado, so you have to factor that into my analysis.
Jackson State, not Georgia Southern.
Oh, I apologize.
But no, they're doing a good job marketing it. I think he's not going to get hosed out. Tyler Warren's not going to get hosed out of the Mackey at this point.
Yeah, he'll win that.
I feel pretty good because he had another good game. Got to keep an eye from the tight end from Bowling Green, but I think if he does what he did against Purdue, against Minnesota, I think Penn State's in a pretty good spot there. Before we flip over, we got to talk about defense at some point in this show. I don't want to talk about the running backs real quick, Shawn. Nick Singleton came back, no concern there from an injury perspective. Did some good things. Katron Allen had some good moments too. Shawn, you had a point way back in the summer, I believe it was. It might have been the spring, talking about the development of the running backs under Ja'Juan Seider. I want to maybe just hit on this a little bit. I still don't know if the running backs have necessarily improved since they've first got on campus. And Katron Allen, to me, has maybe even regressed the smidgen. I think Nick Singleton has gotten better from a blocking, pass catching perspective. And I think there's now a larger gap between Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. I'm not saying Katron Allen's bad, but I feel like maybe Katron Allen maybe hasn't taken a step back, but maybe hasn't really gotten better. I'm just curious what you think on that take.
Yeah, I think that's about right. When Katron first got here, I remember saying this on here. I thought he'd get faster because most running backs get faster here. He hasn't. It just hasn't happened. That lack of burst from when he was a freshman is still there. And I don't even know if it's more pronounced, but it seems like it is. That he's just a step slower than what you want out of a top end running back. And I really like Shawn Allen. And I'm not saying he's got to run like a 4.3 here, but I thought he'd be as fast by his last year. I thought he'd be as fast as like a Blake Corum. And he is not. So yeah, I think with Cider, if there's one criticism, is guys, he brings in a lot of really good players, but it makes me think when you look at a guy like Corey Smith or Quentin Martin, who I think both have shown good potential this year, I'm not sure how much better they're going to get. I think Smith will get better in particular because he's still a little small right now, so I think he's going to get bigger.
Right, from a training conditioning perspective.
Yes, because I do have faith in that. But do I think he's going to be like significantly better than he is right now? Based on Cider's track record, I got my doubts about it.
To give you an idea, Shawn Allen rushed 6 carries for 20 yards. It's 3.3 yards per carry. Corey Smith, 8 carries for 37 yards, 4.6 yards per carry. And I know it's very dangerous to compare box scores like that. But in this case, I think it's reasonable to do so. Corey Smith got in when obviously Penn State was going to be more run-centric in the second half there. And although got 2 more carries, averaged 1.3 yards per carry more. And I think if you watch the tape, you would kind of agree that Corey Smith, from a running perspective, did have a better day than Shawn Allen. And is only going to get bigger from a size perspective, like you just said. And now that I think about it, like where Nick Singleton has gotten better, I think the pass catching, it's fair to give him credit for working on that as far as a hands, because Shawn Allen was a better pass catcher originally, and I think Singleton's probably better than him now, or at least the same. But even Nick Singleton, I think, has gotten stronger and faster, but and deserves credit for that. But even then, from a strictly development perspective, I don't really know what to think of Singleton and Allen from freshman to now. It's hard to tell with Singleton because he's been banged up, but I do think Singleton has gotten better even from a coaching perspective. I don't know if Shawn Allen has. And look, they're both going to play a bunch down the stretch, and they're both going to stay healthy, and they're both probably going to go to the NFL this year. It's just a very interesting kind of, and I don't need to talk about any more about it, but I just wanted to bring that up again because I think it was a really good point you made in the spring, and it's something to pay attention to as Penn State continues to bring in these top running backs. These will be the first 2, right, that Cider recruited and stayed all the way through. Is that what we said before in the spring?
That would be correct. Yes.
Which is kind of crazy.
I would consider Tank Smith one, but not a scholarship guy. No, I think Singleton has definitely got more well-rounded. And that is a credit to developing him. Because he's better from a pass catching perspective. I think most guys, just from the nature of their position, they get better blocking here when they're running backs, and I think he has. So there's definitely some things that you could point to and say Singleton has gotten better, but like even Singleton though, would you say he's gotten faster since he's been here? I don't think so. Now he's already a speedster, so it was never really his issue. Like he was faster than Saquon was his freshman year.
Yeah.
So speed was never an issue with him. And there are still some flaws in Singleton's game, but I do think is he a more well-rounded player than when he stepped on campus here? Yeah, I think so.
We can table that discussion for now. I mean, it's something to keep an eye on, but Penn State will.
They're both going to go over 100 yards in the playoffs now. In a playoff game.
And make us look silly.
Yeah.
Penn State's going to be okay from running back perspective, too. I'm excited about Corey Smith, Quentin Martin Jr., and Cam Wallace. I mean, you're going to see some sort of drop-off, but really, like, I don't expect much. We'll see kind of what exactly happens there. Before we move to defense, because we got to talk about defense, I just want to mention the offensive line. Didn't allow a sack on Saturday. They are now tied for second in the Power 4 with sacks allowed this season, just giving up 9 sacks. They did a really good job. I thought Drew Aller did a good job escaping, especially on that one play where he ran out, and I think he picked up approximately 14. We broke a couple tackles. But the offensive line did a good job in pass protection, did a fairly good job running the football. Wanted to just mention, too, Kydron Jenkins for Purdue ended up with 7 tackles. He had that one really nice TFL. So made us look smart for highlighting him. And then you and I were talking about, like, would Jenkins start for Penn State? I think that proved that he would. And then I also wanted to mention Penn State's offensive line did a really good job on Will Helt, who did end up with 1 TFL. But I really like him. I think he's going to be a pretty good player for them. He's only a sophomore. They did a pretty good job against him. Be curious, what his trajectory is like. But I thought in general the offensive line held their own and looked pretty good on the road. There was some issues with false starts and delay games and stuff like that. Don't necessarily think it's obviously all the offensive line's fault, but that probably needs to get cleaned up a little bit. That was a little bit uncharacteristic. We hadn't seen as much of that. Some of that was because Bo played a lot more in the second half. But can't have any of that against Minnesota next week. But otherwise, pretty happy with the offensive line performance.
Yeah, they've protected Drew well pretty much the whole year. That was one thing that I know both of us were concerned about when Fashanu and Wallace went in the first few rounds in the NFL. Anytime you're replacing your offensive tackle, especially high quality ones, pass protection is going to be a concern. But those concerns were, I was not concerned anymore after watching them really throughout the whole year, including against some of the better teams that we played. And then yesterday too, they opened up holes pretty consistently. We were really able to up front do really what we wanted against Purdue, and that's basically what you want against this team. And that's part of why we spent 15 to 20 minutes talking about the receivers at the beginning of the show, because the receivers still weren't getting involved as much as we would have liked. But there is no concern at all on the offensive line. It continues to be a strength of this team, and you win with the tip of the spear. And especially when we start getting into postseason play, they're gonna have to play at a level like this. So good building block. And I mean, just in the immediate future, you're playing against a good Minnesota defense next week on the road. So they're going to have to bring it next week as well.
Yeah. We talked a little bit, and we'll talk more about Minnesota on Thursday. Show will be on Thursday. But kind of need Penn State to go into Minnesota. And if you want to be a playoff team, if you want to potentially even be considered a national championship contender, you need to take care of business at Minnesota. One other thing I wanted to mention, Penn State does rank now first in tackles for loss allowed within the Power 4. Helped the third down percentage as far as staying on track. So they've done a really good job on third down this year, which is not something that we typically see with Franklin coach teams. So that's nice as well. Shawn, let's go do the defense. Buried the lead long enough. Abdul Carter is playing out of his mind right now. It took a little bit, but Abdul Carter is just going nuts. He is so much more comfortable playing defensive end right now than he was back in October. And he's really turning it up right now. He is a menace in pass rushing situations. He is causing disruption on running plays. And then even on screens and other miscellaneous plays, he is closing fast. And if you're a Penn State fan, you've got to be really excited about the trajectory of Abdul Carter heading into potentially the playoff. I mean, he has figured it out compared to where he was in September. So really excited about that. He really should have probably had like 5 sacks in this game. Didn't end up with one today. Did have 2 TFLs. Was held the entire game. I think he got at least 2 holding calls, but probably could have been like 7 or 8. 2 of them are egregiously bad. But Abdul Carter's playing out of his mind right now. And I asked you this. I texted you this, Shawn. You look around the country, I thought maybe there would be a player or two on Tennessee's defense that maybe would warrant it. They just got beat by Georgia. I don't know if there's a better defensive player in the country right now than Abdul Carter. He is very disruptive. From a TFL perspective, nationally, he is now second in the country with 17 and a half TFLs. He is number 1 in the Power 4 with TFLs. He is 3 TFLs ahead of the next Power 4 defender, sitting there with 17 and a half. I don't know. I don't know if he's going to win the Lombardi or some of these other national defensive awards, but at this point, I don't know how he isn't in consideration for him. Basically, averaging 2 TFLs per game.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's playing the best football of any defensive player in the James Franklin era right now, and pretty high praise for sure. But just when you watch him play, I mean, he is disruptive from the first play until the end. He is balanced. He's able to get after the quarterback. He's been really good against the run. So there's not really much of a hole in his game right now. And, we were wondering, is he going to be able to get it all figured out by the time he gets out of Penn State? And he has. And it's been a really cool thing to watch. And yeah, when you look around the country, I don't think there are a lot of guys that would strike fear in an offense more than Abdul Carter. I don't know if there's anybody who would. So yeah, he is elevating this. He has elevated his play in the last few weeks. And I think he's going to continue to do that. So it's just been really exciting to watch him continue to develop, both from obviously a Penn State perspective because he is on the team, but also from a personal perspective. Like he has earned a lot of money this year, and that's been really, really awesome to see from him. So I mean, you might have to go back to Paul Posluszny last time we saw a defensive guy play like this at Penn State.
It's just funny because it's completely a massive juxtaposition between where we were at in September when everyone was like hammering on him to go back to linebacker. Now, some of that, especially from us, was more about the linebackers, I think, than it was the defensive ends or him necessarily not playing well. But there's no question. I mean, turning it on, and the one play that wasn't a TFL, but was a pretty big third down, and he was on the opposite side of a screen and just closed so fast. I'll have to get that play. Just closed so fast. It was remarkable. And I think that it seemed like everyone else was in slow motion. He was in full speed. You start thinking about playoff matchups, and he's a guy to me that can win you a playoff game. Like he's that good where he is like JTT disruptive, can just take over a game and ruin it. Like you could do everything right as an offense, and he could just single-handedly ruin the game for you. And to me, when you look at this defense that isn't great at getting turnovers, doesn't give up the big play, but isn't necessarily overwhelming, he's a guy that is. And I think you need somebody like that when you're going up against talent that is comparable to yours. He could be a difference for Penn State.
And Penn State's in a unique spot right now because they have 2 unique generational, whatever you want to say, players on both sides of the ball. They have Tyler Warren on offense, and they have Abdul Carter on defense. And that's a rare thing to have 2 guys that are just complete matchup nightmares on both sides of the ball. So you definitely don't want to let a season like this where they're both playing at such an extremely high level, you don't want to let it go to waste. And that means you must beat Minnesota this week. You have to beat Minnesota this week. I mean, I think you have to win a playoff game too, but like no matter what the bare minimum is, you have to get to the playoff with this team because you're not going to have a year like this very often where you have two game records on both sides. Well, you have a game record on both sides of the ball like this.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, you could make the argument, Shawn, once this is all said and done. Like, if Penn State's able to make some noise, it's going to be because of denied Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter. Even throw Amin Van over there. He had a sack. He was able to finally get home. Those guys, to me, are the difference makers if this thing gets serious for Penn State. I think you could look at the linebackers and go, they're the reason why it wouldn't. But the defensive ends, if Penn State's able, see, here's the thing that maybe people aren't realizing. If Penn State's able to get off to a fast start, it completely changes the complexion of this game for defenses, for this defense. Like, starting fast on offense for Penn State allows their defensive ends to tee off on the quarterback, and it completely changes the complexion. But if you start slow and teams are able to run the rock, there's that one drive Purdue had. Now, Penn State was already up 14-0, and they already were getting backups in the game. Like, I think Tamir Robinson was already out in the field. I think I saw I think it was a Day Lane was already out in the field for it. Like, there was a lot of the whole defensive line was backups. Like, they got backups in literally on the third series on defense. But that drive, Purdue was able to run the ball and move it a little bit, and they ended up deciding to kick a field goal, which is just like, I don't want to win the football game if I'm kicking a field goal against Penn State down 14-0. But that drive is like what Penn State's defense wants to avoid. The best way to avoid those type of drives is to score early and get a lead and put some pressure on the offense to throw the football and let your guys go after it. And they've been able to do that pretty much against their last two opponents, and to a certain degree, even Ohio State, although they weren't able. I'll keep always going back to that drive right after the pick six, where their defense is able to get a stop there. Who knows? That game could get ugly for Ohio State. Just the way, again, you have those defensive linemen. If you're able to go up 17-0, it's a completely different game instead of it being 10-7. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at here is it is a different defense than we saw in September and October if you can get a 14-point lead, which is pretty obvious, I think. But it really, really benefits the strength of this defense, which is the defensive ends. And I always go back to, you earn the right to rush the passer by stopping the run on first and second down. Well, in this case, you earn the right to rush the passer by getting a lead on offense. And when they're able to do that, these guys are something serious. If I'm a Penn State fan, the recipe, and probably the only way Penn State goes deep into the playoff, is if they're able to get off to a fast start.
Yeah, that's why when we were having our early season, early game struggles, they were concerning, and that's why teams would hang around until the third quarter. And we're sitting here like late second quarter against Kent State, like, come on, we're up like 10-0 right now, and the worst team in the FBS. So yeah, I mean, being able to pin your ears back with any defense is big, but when you have, guy that's been the best disruptor in the country and a guy who's no slouch on the other end and deny Dennis Sutton, you're able to just let those guys tee off. Yeah, that's huge for you. No question about it. You brought up the touchdown drive. You brought up the touchdown drive. And then even a little bit before and after that, I guess we're pretty good at nitpicking here, right?
I would say so.
The linebackers have to be better because they make the same mistakes every single week. They fill the wrong holes. They're not where they're supposed to be. It's just the same thing, really, from the same players every single week. And I mean, it already did cost them against Ohio State, so it already cost them a game, but it's going to cost them again. And I don't know when this is going to get fixed, if it will be fixed, but it's got to happen because it's it's the reason why this defense isn't thought of higher than it is. And I think most Penn State fans have a thought once a week, is this defense even that good? And it's because they don't suffocate teams on the ground as well as they should. And they'll let a team, like, there's a 12-yard run. There's an 8-yard run. Why? Linebackers didn't fill the hole right. It's not even the guys up front a lot, like the defense tackles in the ends. It's the linebackers aren't filling. And it's been an ongoing issue, and I think it'll continue to be an issue. Nothing changes. Nothing changes.
No, and I think again, Tony Rojas has some moments. I think Kobe King should have had his third sack in 3 straight games and just barely didn't get there. But yeah, I mean, look, Dom DeLuca, we've talked about him a lot. Great guy, great player. Really, what's his ceiling and what's he going to be? It was nice to see Tamir Robinson out there because he needs to continue to get better. That's actually kind of where I wanted to. And 2 things I wanted to get to. I wanted to just randomly talk about the college football landscape at the end of the episode. But the other thing I wanted to mention was Penn State got 68 players on the field, and a lot of them were defensive players. I mean, a lot of them in that back 7, especially. Well, I shouldn't just say especially because there's a lot of guys in the defensive line that got in too. But Saka got in there, which I'm pretty high on him. And going to be able, or do I always say Saka? I mean Specca.
Yeah.
I always do that. Robinson got in, which is nice to see. Day Lane struggled a little bit, but then he had one series that he really flashed and kind of put some nice things together. So that was nice to see from a Day Lane perspective. Belgrave Shorter got in the game and he did some okay things. I really like Wosley Jr. I know he gave up 1 catch there, but I think Wosley Jr., he seems to have it as far as nose for the football. To Cam Miller, he had a nice play. I think we ended up being right about Cam Miller as far as, well, maybe I was right about Cam Miller. I don't know if you had a strong stance on it, but I was pretty like Cam Miller is not him, and I don't think he is him. But he had a nice play in a backup role, and that was nice to see from a confidence perspective. I'm trying to think.
That was so funny.
What's that?
I didn't think he was him, and he's not. I don't think he is him.
No, but he had some nice plays at least. I'm trying to think who else. I mean, the biggest thing I guess we should mention was that Jalen Harvey was out there and unfortunately he had a really nice play. I think you tweeted saying something like, is that Chop Robinson? And then unfortunately it looks like he hyperextended his knee and was carted off the field. So I wouldn't necessarily expect to see him for some period of time. Those hyperextensions, I mean, I'm not a medical person, but I think sometimes it's like really bad and then sometimes it's not as bad. Like the hyperextension isn't the end of the world as it is like an ACL, but we'll see. Obviously you got to be careful with it given he's only a freshman. He's got plenty of time to come back. And then Xavier Gilliam, 54, was out there a lot at defensive tackle. Don't know if he necessarily did a bunch, but he was out there a lot. So I wanted to highlight him. In general, Penn State brought 16 freshmen this week, which, Shawn, you can make the argument for being 1-0 mentality. It seems like they're kind of thinking about 1-0s moving forward, which I'm not saying is the wrong thing, but like, I want to know how James Franklin kind of pitches that as far as we want to go 1-0, but also we know we need to look for, the future. Like, how do you frame that to your guys of you need to take this seriously, we need to win this game, go 1-0, but also we plan to play backups because we think we're going to demolish them. Like, it's a very kind of careful line you have to walk there.
Well, I don't think he tells the players that. But their conversation with the coaches, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they already have, believe me, like they already have people. It would shock me if they didn't already have people scouting the Tennessee and Georgia game. They're absolutely watching that game because those are teams we might be playing next month. Now, did they tell the players that? No, no, of course not, because it's 1-0 around the players. But among the coaches, yeah, like that they know what the score is. And they know, all right, Brian not going to lose to Purdue here, so let's prepare to bring a lot of guys. But yeah, I thought Tyrese Mills played well.
Yeah.
He made a lot of plays. Now,
That
he's
was a
been
hell of
here
a
a
tackle.
while.
He had a spot in the hole there on Purdue's best drive.
Yeah. Yeah, like he has been here a while, but he's bounced back and forth between safety and linebacker, a bit of a tweener in that aspect. But yeah, I thought he had a couple of good moments. Really liked seeing Jalen Harvey, like you said. Unfortunately, it sucked to see him get hurt like that. I know he got carded, so it's usually not a good sign when a guy gets carded. But
No.
like you said, it could have just been under precaution. Um, it looked like too when he got hurt, the other ends came out again to kind of support him. Now I think one of them helped carry him off, but like you just kind of see the camaraderie in that
Yeah.
room right now. And that's really a positive thing to see
Absolutely.
from a leadership perspective, especially, I mean, the game is almost over. A lot of guys too. I think a lot of the starters,
Don't pay attention as much.
I
It
think a
seems
lot
like
of them tune out.
yeah, and
But
it
I don't
seems like
think
the D line is focused and wanting to see their guys eat.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you think about it, it's almost like a natural thing to be thinking about, I don't know, calling your girlfriend after the game, telling her you're coming home, thinking about where you're gonna go eat and think about all that stuff. But these guys just seem very locked in. And I want to talk about a little bit about that. I thought last year's leadership, especially in some rooms, was a bit of an issue. I do not think it's an issue at all this year. I think this is a team that's locked in and very, very confident. And they feel really good about their older guys being leaders. Like there are no guys that are on this team right now like we've had in the past. And I think we had this last year, too many guys at least. But I think in previous years we've had guys that even have a leadership role on this team that really just weren't good leaders. I don't think you have that this year. And that
That,
is
that-
very
point.
important come next month.
Got a couple other shout outs here. First of all, you mentioned linebackers. Just wanted to mention Rojas ended up not with a single tackle on the game yesterday. Davian Collins ended up with 4 tackles, almost had a pick. He's had some good moments. Again, I don't think he's ever going to be the guy, but he's had some really good flashes.
He's had
Zion,
2 plays like that in the last 2
yeah,
weeks.
2 almost interceptions.
Unbelievable.
Zion Tracy to me has got to be the storyline of the year as far as just working his way into the starting lineup. And he like that's a perfect example. Like if you compare him to Cam Miller, he just seems to have better ball skills and seems to kind of make the play when it matters more than Cam Miller. And at the end of the day, like kind of what you need to do position over and over. You got to start making the plays as well. It seemed like Zion Tracy did. We didn't mention we talked about the DNs as far as moving forward, but Denai Dennis Sutton, literally like one of the first plays of the game, gets a sack and just like, hey, by the way, I'm healthy. He ended up with 2 TFLs as well. So you had 2 TFLs for both Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton. Jalen Reed got banged up. He got back out there pretty much immediately. So no concerns there. Keziah Izzard with a sack. Alonzo Ford is playing a lot of football now. Alonzo Ford Jr. ends up with a half of a TFL, but I don't know exactly why Hakeem Beamon left. Alonzo Ford Jr. is part of the reason because he has demanded more playing time in this last month, and that's very good to see. Caleb Artest got out there a little bit too from defensive tackle. I wanted to mention Colin Dinkins, blue and white MVP. He actually got out there on the field and ended up with a tackle. And then also John Mitchell saw some playing time as well, number 12, true freshman. Both him and Belgrave Short are coming from the same high school. So, and then Dakari Nelson also saw the field a little bit too. So a lot of guys getting involved there. It's weird because you don't usually see these games on the road. Usually it's the home games where you see a lot of these guys getting in and you're trying to. It's one of those games where you got to have the roster on your phone because you're like, who's that? Who's that?
Yeah.
It was really nice to see that. It's always fun to see guys who I think Gary Danielson did a really good job of this. These guys work just as hard as the starters do and deserve an opportunity to play and get out there and do some good things. And it's always nice to see that. Shawn, I have a question for you. I'll let you rebuttal anything I said, but then I have a question for you.
Yeah. Like they um a lot of times you'll see a big drop off when the backups get into. I don't think you really even saw that. Now Purdue had a lot of backups in as well, so you have to take that into account. But sometimes you see a big drop off. I didn't really see that. I think in that drive that Purdue kicked a field goal, we tried to work the backups in earlier. I think we touched on that too. They didn't look that great on that drive, but you're going up against a Big Ten starting defense, and you have a lot of backups in. So you're going to expect they're going to get you a little bit here and there. So, and they did. But overall, I thought they played well. I thought I liked a lot of things that I saw from the young guys. Belgrave Shorter had a bit of a baptism by fire moment. Got juked out of his shoes on the touchdown from Purdue, but that's going to happen. That's how you learn. So, but yeah, I think a lot of positives and and it's always good. I think from the coaches where you have a lot of tape to grade, makes guys feel involved, and that's important because
playing on the road,
if you have an injury or two coming up, you're going to need some of these guys.
Yeah, and playing on the road too, I think is good. That's one thing to play at home.
Yeah.
In garbage time, it's something to be on the road. It's a little bit different environment. My question, Shawn, you kind of pissed that we didn't see any Grunkmeyer?
A little bit. I would have liked to see him. I actually tweeted something like that during the game that I think I tweeted Bo the rest of the game, right? And I think Will Gamble, who frequently tweets, I think he's been in the chat a couple times, replied, well, what about Grunk? I was like, not a bad point.
Yeah.
And I think he could have got in. He traveled, right?
I'm assuming he traveled. It'd be a shocker if they only brought 2 quarterbacks.
Bring 3 quarterbacks because you never know what could happen. But yeah, I'm a little surprised he didn't get in. I think and I guess the reason why I'm a little surprised is Bo, he's not a starter, but he plays every game.
Right.
Like, I think he has enough reps. He brought us from behind on the road already. So he has seen a lot. Like, there's not a ton that he hasn't seen, especially after this season. So I think playing Grunk at least a little bit in the fourth quarter probably would have been more beneficial for him than it would have been for Bo.
And potentially Grunk, unless they know something we don't know. I mean, Drew Aller could be gone, and your backup wouldn't have any experience to this point. So
yes,
not
ideal.
Not ideal. So we have 3 fan questions. I think we can tie them in pretty well. The biggest one's from Dorito Bandit. He says, does it seem like Drew Aller hasn't looked let me just start over there. Does it seem like Drew hasn't looked quite the same since the injury at Wisconsin? He still moves well, finds open receivers, but doesn't throw into tight coverage like he did against USC. Does he not trust himself, or does he not trust the wide receivers to win on the one-on-one? So, Shawn, you kind of talked about this at the beginning, so we don't need to beat the horse that is clearly dead too much. As far as he didn't seem to really thread the needle as much, is that a issue as far as a power thing? Is that an issue as far as confidence of the receivers? Is it just, hey, I can live for another day against Purdue, let's not give them anything? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I don't even really think, in my mind, I don't even think it's really the injury. I think that's an interesting thing you brought up, though, because I think when he needs to, he will do it. And that's something that we didn't really see from him previously. And he showed against USC, like, he will throw the ball into a tight window. I wish we would see more of it, because I think that's one of the things when scouts are looking at him, if he does decide to go pro this year, and I don't know if he will, but if he does, I think one of the things you're going to see is, yeah, his receivers weren't great, but he didn't really give them as many opportunities as he could have to go and make a play. Now, early on in the year, yes, he was doing that a whole lot more. I think part of it is the competition went up a bit, especially from the out of conference. And I mean, maybe it has to do with the injury. I don't think it does, because I still think he still has his fastball. You could still see it. But could be a difference in competition. And then I don't really get it against Purdue. I don't know why you wouldn't throw the ball in the tight windows against Purdue. I don't. This is the worst defense in the Big Ten. Trust your receivers a little bit. And I hate to be critical of a game that he went 17-19, but if you go 15 of 19, I don't think it really matters that much. And I think it's going to help you a little bit if you're throwing the ball into tighter windows and you're getting your receivers more involved and you're getting more production from those receivers. I'd rather the 15-19 game.
Yeah, I don't know how much they were open. I think Julian Fleming was open a couple times, but it does make you kind of wonder. So,
yeah, the receivers don't do him any favors. I get it. I know our issues at receiver. I get it. But sometimes you have to throw guys open, and he was doing that more at the beginning of the year. You brought up the USC game, and before that, he was doing that on a weekly basis. But you have seen him get away from that a little bit since Wisconsin.
the guy is not named Warren.
Yes, he will force to feed the ball to Warren. And that's going to be something that when scouts look at him, they'll go, he zeroed in on Tyler Warren. And kind of use that almost against him that he did that. I don't even think that's necessarily fair because I think a lot of these things are designed to go to Tyler Warren.
Right.
But that is going to be something that that scouts will bring up.
Another question here and final question here from Ethan Collins. Who's one team you want to see Penn State play in a home playoff game and one team you don't want to see Penn State play in a playoff game? I'll let you go first, Shawn.
I think a team that I would not like to see is Bama. I think Bama is a trickier team than people realize. I think they're a more dangerous team than people realize. There's still a lot of talent there. I know they've had a couple tough losses this year. And they've had games that they didn't really look that great. I still think they're a team that could win the national championship. Because they have so much talent. I think Jalen Milroe, when he's good, he's really, really, really good. So that's a team that I wouldn't really want to see. I get they'd have to come up here. That would be a challenge for them, but that would be a dogfight. That'd be a dogfight for sure. A team that I would like to see is Ole Miss, who Penn State was projected to play last week, because I don't know if what they do is going to work in 30-degree weather. And I don't know if they'll be able to just throw the ball around. They don't have Quinshon Judkins anymore. I just think that's where the weather could really help us. I think we're more equal from a talent perspective than a lot of these other teams. So I would rather play out of all the teams that I see, outside of Boise State, obviously. But I'd rather play Boise State than any of or BYU. Although BYU is a possibility now. So maybe I'd go BYU, actually. I'm going to retract my Ole Miss and replace it with BYU.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to say a team I don't want to see is Ole Miss. They have a really good defense. I don't know if Penn State scores 20 points against Ole Miss's defense. And that puts a lot of pressure on our defense to us for 4 quarters. I just rather not see that. Also, Lane Kiffin's a little bit of a wild card there. I think Lane Kiffin could potentially eat Tom Allen's lunch. So I would not want to see Ole Miss. I do think Penn State would be fine and happy to see Notre Dame. They have a good defense. They've had some injuries though on their defense. I don't think they do anything on offense that scares me. And I think that's a team that we would match up pretty well with. If they had all of their players at the beginning of the season, their defense is really, really, really good. I think they're a little bit more vulnerable now. Be very, very curious to see how that USC Notre Dame goes at the end of the year. But yeah, those would be mine.
I have a strange feeling USC is going to beat them.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I can't put my finger on it, but I just do.
You mentioned BYU. I just wanted to kind of wrap up the show with that. BYU did lose last night to Kansas. I fell asleep watching it, but I was very, very tired. BYU's had a lot of close games, and we talked on the last episode about if BYU would lose would they be ranked in front of Penn State? And now, if you look at their schedule, it's kind of hard to 100% tell because they have, in my opinion, some decent wins. Most notably, they beat number 14 SMU, which SMU was able to pull it out and win yesterday. That's a pretty good win. That's technically a better win than anything Penn State currently has. Their blowout win over Kansas State doesn't look as good because I believe Kansas State lost again. But they also won at Utah, which I think is pretty impressive. I know Colorado just beat them, but I that rivalry game at Utah is not an easy one. So they have a decent amount of wins, but losing to Kansas, who I think Kansas is a better team than people give credit to. They still have some really good weapons over there. They just don't have Andy Kotelnicki anymore. To me, is very interesting. I don't think BYU is going to be ahead of Penn State come the CF college football playoff rankings. I don't know why. I wouldn't necessarily disagree if they were ahead of us. I just have a feeling they're not going to be. And then, oh, by the way, they go to Arizona State next week. And Arizona State still has a path to the Big 12 championship with a big win last night. Who the heck did Arizona State beat last night?
Kansas State.
That was a Kansas State game. Okay. Yeah, they beat Kansas State 24-14 at Kansas State in Manhattan. Arizona State has won 3 straight against Oklahoma State, UCF, and Kansas State. So I don't even know if they win that game, to be honest with you. This could get crazy really fast because, again, BYU, although undefeated up until yesterday, has had some insanely close wins that they have maybe used all their luck on. For example, they barely beat SMU. They barely beat Baylor. They barely beat Oklahoma State. They barely beat Utah. So they've had some really close games already. I could see them losing another game, and that completely changes things. So otherwise, nothing crazy in the top 10, Shawn. A lot of top 20-ish teams lost. Missouri loses to South Carolina. So, of course, now South Carolina is the best thing since sliced bread, and now Missouri is not. That does hurt Alabama a little bit because Alabama barely beat South Carolina but blew out Missouri, and that Missouri win's not a top 10 win. Might even not be a top 25 win anymore, which we've been telling you that for a while, that Missouri is not very good. Kansas State lost, so they're out. Washington State lost last night, so they're kind of out. Could Illinois slip in, Shawn, and maybe bolster Penn State's rankings a smidgen? I don't know. They just blew out Michigan State. They play Rutgers this weekend. But if you're Penn State, you're desperately asking anybody to find a way to make your resume look better. If Wisconsin could have pulled out the win against Oregon last night, you could literally say we went to Wisconsin at night and we won, and without our starting quarterback and our potentially second or third best defensive player, and Oregon wasn't able to. You're trying to find something that you can hang your hat on besides a close loss to Ohio State, because that's the best thing you got right now.
Yeah, I mean, the resume, we've definitely had better resumes in the past. It's just not that, and we're probably, knock on wood, going to go 11-1. So it's funny to say that, but like you said, there just isn't that signature win on the schedule. Maybe Illinois sneaks in the top 25. I still think the USC game was important. I don't think it was the most important win in like the history of Penn State football, like some people thought, and I didn't think that after the game either. Some people really went off the deep end after that game, but I still think it was an important win, kind of like we mentioned earlier, Oregon beating Wisconsin last night, where you're playing a decent team, you don't have your fastball. It's a frustrating night, but you still find a way to win. The key in that is being able to find a way to win. And that's what Penn State was able to do out at USC, and Oregon was able to do against Wisconsin. So I think just stringing games together, and look, you're going to have to deal with the SEC propaganda because yes, there is going to be a push now. You watch and see to get South Carolina into the playoff. It's gonna happen. It's already kind of underway to get them in, because they beat a middle of the road Missouri team. I don't think they get a home playoff game. Hell, Cory, maybe I'll say I'd rather play South Carolina out of all these teams and host them, because yes, I think Penn State would beat South Carolina. But I know that would make Paul Feinbaum's head explode to have such a thought, but
dude, South Carolina would win the Big Ten according to some folks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I watched them play multiple times this year. I never thought, oh man, they're going to be dangerous if they could find a way in the playoff. I just don't. I don't see it. And maybe this will be hashtag old takes exposed, but I don't see it with them. The only reason they're getting any kind of consideration is because of the conference they play in.
Yeah, we have this fellow on YouTube named T saying Penn State getting a host is a crime, and stop with Illinois. Also,
then who should get a home game over us?
Yeah.
Name the teams.
I also hate to say it, but Illinois is literally 5th in the conference right now, sitting there at 7-3. They finish with at Rutgers and at Northwestern. If they win both of those games, they would be 9-3 and definitely would end up ranked. Just
right.
By the way, for folks.
Yeah, I'm not gonna, say Illinois is like the cream of the crop here. I don't think that's what we're saying.
No.
But you also look at our strength of schedule. It is around top 30 in the country. So I think strength of schedule, it could be manipulated in a lot of ways because we don't have that marquee win. But it's not. We've played a lot of decent teams this year. We were able to beat all of them. We just lost to the one really, really good team we played.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Shawn. So everyone talks about the strength of schedule and says, oh, Penn State hasn't beat anyone elite. Okay, that's fair. But those same people then turn around and try to ignore really bad losses. Like, you can't blame Penn State for taking care of all of their average teams that they've beaten. Like, at Wisconsin, at USC, at West Virginia. Are those great teams? No. But they went on the road and won those games when a lot of teams aren't able to do that. Tennessee losing to Arkansas. Bama losing to Vandy. You lose those games and people want to kind of forget about them and just focus on one win that team has, and you ignore the entire body of work. And I think the committee is doing that well. My favorite example of that is actually with Georgia. Everyone was so mad about Georgia being on the outside of the last playoff. Okay, and they were citing their number one strength of schedule. Sure, that's great. However, not only did they lose, but also they've had some really not great games. If you want to look at their full body of work, look at the Kentucky game, look at the Mississippi State game. Like, there are multiple times where Georgia has not looked very good. And I think a lot of people just want to kind of forget about that and just now look at a couple good wins. Now, I will say the win over Tennessee really helps their case, and I'm all for that. But when you look at Penn State, a close loss to potentially the number 1 or number 2 team in the country, and then taking care of and not losing to everybody else is also important. I think people tend to forget about the part where you win games.
And the belly aching about where Georgia was, they were obviously going to get in if they beat Tennessee, which they did. Like, this, I think these rankings, and I'm reveals that they're cool, but the games take care of themselves. Like, there's
right.
Not from
especially
an
in the SEC.
Yes, but and not even from an SEC perspective with this one. Indiana, big controversy about Indiana, where they belong. Some people think they should be like 2 or 3 in the country. Some people don't even think they belong in the top and in the playoff. It's a wide range of opinions on Indiana.
Right.
But everything's going to get figured out on Indiana because they play Ohio State this week. So we're going to know exactly what we have with the Indiana Hoosiers come Saturday. Right. Do I think Indiana is going to win? I don't. But
at least they're given a shot to do so.
Yes, they're given a shot. And if they win, Yeah, at that point, they should probably be a top 2 team in the country. It's that simple. If their name was Penn State or it was Michigan or if it was especially an SEC team, yeah, they'd be right up there and they should be too. If they lose, well, it depends on how bad the loss is. If they lose like Penn State did, they should still get in the playoff. Maybe get a playoff game, depending on how it goes. Or maybe get a home playoff game, depending on how it goes. Like the stuff always figures itself out, is what I'm saying. So
Especially this time of year, there's a lot of belly aching, and it's like, just wait, right? Like, no one's now gonna. It's hard to imagine arguing for a Tennessee team who beat Bama but lost to an Arkansas team that's not good. I don't care who you are in the SEC, that's not a good team. They lost to Oklahoma State, who has not won any other Power 4 games this year. Like,
yeah, and
now you had a chance. I think I made this point last night to you guys. Tennessee is kind of very much Tennessee is like Penn State, but Tennessee also usually. Let me say that again. Penn State is like Tennessee in the fact that they just haven't been able to get over the hump in the SEC. But also Tennessee still finds a way to lose a game they probably shouldn't every year. And Penn State's not doing that right now. We go into the Minnesota game, I probably just jinx the hell out of it. But that to me is a huge difference. It is one thing for Tennessee to lose to Georgia. Another thing for them to then lose to Arkansas. And that is huge to me. That is the difference between being a top 10 team consistently and flirting with the top 10. And in this world of playoff rankings, if you are able to take care of the people you're supposed to take care of, you have a very good chance of making it. And I think that is completely reasonable for the committee to expect you to beat the people you're supposed to beat.
Yep. And if Penn State's as mediocre as these talking heads are saying they are, then they should get tripped up by a Minnesota, or they should have gotten tripped up by a Wisconsin or by a USC. And who knows, maybe they will get tripped up by Minnesota. But like I was saying, these things tend to figure themselves out. So okay, Penn State gets tripped up by Minnesota this week. Let's say it happens. One thing I will tell you is I will not come on here and say we need to be in the playoff. I'll be like, no, you lost to Minnesota. Whatever happens, happens. You earn everything you get then.
Yep.
But if you don't, and assuming we take care of business against Maryland next week, yeah, they should be in. Like this isn't hard, is what I'm saying. And all of this gets figured out. And now there's just we're in the point of the college football season where there's just a lot of noise. But a lot of it, if any of it, it pretty much all means nothing right now.
It's insane to me that anybody would be mad at Penn State hosting a playoff game for losing to Ohio State by 7 points. And that's your only loss.
Yeah.
Yeah. T comes back with, this is neither here nor there, but just curious how many losses you would think you would have the Georgia schedule. Well, we kind of talked about this on X all week. Georgia, Penn State, if they played each other, would pretty much be a pick 'em. Some data people have Penn State straight up even. Some people have Georgia 1.5 points. Like, that's basically a pick 'em. So I would say that they would probably have the same record that Georgia has right now, assuming everything. They would probably have the exact record. And I don't think anyone is mad with Georgia going, potentially to go to the SEC championship and have a chance to make it. I mean, they absolutely should. I will say this.
I'm taking the question literally, and I'm looking at their schedule right now.
It is debauchery that Georgia's done with the SEC slate, and their last 2 games are non-conference. That should 100% be illegal. I'm going to repeat that. It is insane that Georgia, with 2 weeks left in the season, doesn't play another SEC game. Just unreal. Shawn, who do they have next?
They have UMass and Georgia Tech.
UMass and then Georgia Tech. Now, Georgia Tech's not as awful as they typically are, but to not have any massive games the last 2 weeks of the season to decide your SEC fate is crazy to me. It's crazy. Shouldn't be allowed. Injuries are stacking up. People are playing back-to-back tough weeks. It's getting cold out. And you play UMass and Georgia Tech to end the year? Are you kidding me? So whatever Georgia's ranking is come Tuesday, I don't see them necessarily moving up very much. Like they're pretty much stuck because they have nothing on their resume that's going to improve. Not even, a decent SEC team. Like you're not even playing in your conference the last 2 weeks of the year. That's just outrageous. One final thing I wanted to mention, Shawn. Oh, wait, answer the question before we go to this.
Yeah, I looked at the schedule. I do think we'd beat Clemson. I don't think Clemson's that good. They nearly lost to Pitt. They probably should have lost to Pitt.
Yeah.
And
Pat
then
Narduzzi doesn't go backwards for like 20 yards on that first and goal from like the 2.
Yeah, like they're just not that good. Clemson hasn't been really good since Trevor Lawrence was there. Now the rest of their schedule, yeah, I mean they definitely have a tougher schedule than Penn State. I don't think anyone's going to argue that.
Yeah, they have the number 1 tough schedule in the country.
Yeah,
although I would argue Purdue has to be like number 2. I don't know who does the calculations, but Purdue's literally played Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State like 3 of their last 4 games.
Yeah, they definitely have the toughest November. But the other games they play, good at SEC slate. They play Texas, they play Ole Miss, they play Tennessee, and they played Alabama. I think over that stretch, Penn State probably goes 2-2. Yeah. So I think they beat Clemson, and that would make them 8-2. You know who else is 8-2? The Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia. So yeah, I think 8-2. Could they lose another game? And they could have. Yeah, they could have. They could. But I think they would be 8-2 with that schedule.
Yeah, and honestly, I was a huge believer. If there's any SEC folks, I was high on Tennessee from a defensive perspective. I thought maybe they would shut down Georgia. A little disappointed in the Tennessee defense. That may be because of maybe who they've played. They kind of got bolstered a little bit. So a little bit disappointed there because Carson Beck found himself and was able to pick apart, specifically using the tight ends. So if anything, Penn State's tight ends versus Tennessee would have been a huge problem if Georgia's tight ends are a problem for Tennessee. But I think that will take care of itself. The one thing I wanted to mention, Shawn, which is crazy, was during the game last night, I think it was the Tennessee players that were complaining that their heated benches weren't working. It was 55 degrees.
They have heated benches in that weather?
Yeah. So again, middle of the game last night, Tennessee, Georgia.
Oh, man.
I believe it was a Tennessee position group. I want to say it was a running backs group. Like their benches weren't heated. So they're having to alternate with like a different position group so they could have heated benches. And the weather was 55 degrees. SEC teams are going to be in for a huge awakening when they have to come up to the Big Ten country at the end of December if they're worried about 55 degrees middle November. I mean, we have a whole nother month to go. It's going to be cold even down in the South. Can you imagine what it's going to be like? Again, go back to the rankings on Tuesday. There was 3 games that the Big Ten teams were going to be hosting. It's not going to be warm up here on December 20th. I can promise you that. So I thought that was comical. And if they're worried about that, can only imagine how it's going to be a month from now.
Yeah, God, that's straight up balmy this time of year for us. And that is going to be one of the things, too, that I think you're going to see some SEC, especially SEC homers, advocate for is, well, it's not fair to have to go up to Big Ten country because it's not like a neutral field or the weather's going to play more of a role. But guys, look at the NFL. In the NFL, the Super Bowl's at a neutral field. But you're always seeing a team like Tampa Bay having to come up to Green Bay. Or a team like the Cowboys having to come up to Philly. Like that's what the playoffs are for. And then you get through that game, and then the rest of them are at neutral sites. So I think you're going to see some people, and I think you have seen some people complain about that. But I think that's going to be and maybe I'm looking at it from a Yankee perspective. But I think that's one of the cool things about the playoff is it's so it makes the regular season still really important that you go and you take care of business and then you get a home playoff game. If you don't win your conference, you still get a home playoff game. If
that's Green Bay, right? I mean, the whole point of they're not going to go get rid of that. Like the whole point of this was, if you don't incentivize that, then the whole thing's just a scam, a scam. So that is literally the whole point of that. All right. I think we're good, Shawn. We went long.
Yeah, we did.
So enjoy that. And it's good because you guys are gonna have to go a couple of days. We will try to be back on Thursday night. So we are gonna go Thursday night. If you haven't already, please make sure to like the video and subscribe. And we will be back on Thursday. Shawn, any final shots before we get out of here?
I just saw your reply to Caroline about the guy catching
out
the
of
ball
bounds.
out of bounds.
The guy out of bounds thing that doesn't make sense to me. Like, yeah, I think he was confused. What was he doing with his feet anyway? Even if he thought his left foot was going to be inbounds, like his right foot wasn't even close based off of the sideline.
Yeah.
So I'm not like entirely convinced he had any clue where he was. Like, I do think he ran his route with the assumption that back one was the end zone, and that's why he was open. But I still don't understand what he was doing from a footwork perspective where he thought he was then going to get in bounds. Something doesn't add up to me. Like the way he catches the ball and he's not even like dragging a foot. He literally catches it with both feet in.
Yeah, like he plants his feet.
Yes.
Catches the ball.
Like, so, and I get the depth of the end zone being a problem, but I don't understand how he thought he was in bounds with both feet. I don't know. It's pretty crazy, but that kind of sums up the Purdue season in one play.
Yeah, it was a very confusing play. AJ Harris had such a funny reaction to it. Like, what are you doing, man? Yeah, it was
a good, funny way to end the show. That's for sure.
I do think you may see with Purdue's end zone, maybe they'll have like a green outline around the black next year. That may be what they end up doing.
Someone got yelled at for that for sure.
Yeah, it'd be like, why do we have black paint on top of black paint here?
And just a random line going through it. Yeah, that's that's not great. But anyways, thank you guys for being here on a special Sunday edition. If you guys like it on Sundays, let us know. I'm curious on your feedback on that. But we will catch you guys next time. For Shawn Kane, I'm Cory Lestochi. You've been listening to Hardcore Penn State Football. See you guys.
Have a good night.